We want to welcome you to our City Commission study session. We ask that you please turn off or silence all cell phones during our study session. Meetings are televised every day on Channel 2 at 7 p.m. and at midnight. First item on the agenda is discuss American Legion baseball requests.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, I'll invite up our Parks and Recreation Director, Steve Grant, and a couple members of our Parks Board, who I'll have Steve introduce in just a second. At the April 23rd City Commission meeting, representatives from the American Legion spoke to the Commission on behalf of the organization's baseball program. Specifically, they had multiple areas of requests of the City Commission. The Commission provided a consensus to review 2 of those requests at an upcoming study session, which we're doing tonight. Prior to tonight, the Parks and Recreation Board, for a second time, reviewed specifically these 2 items. The 2 items were the American Legion requesting to have priority reservation status for the baseball field at Eagles location. In addition to the priority of status over other groups or residents of the city, Legion requested that they not be required to pay the standard fee reservation. The second item that the group asked for and the Parks Board reviewed was requesting to have an exemption that would allow them to enter Sports Field Park 1 hour prior to game time rather than 30 minutes, which is customary for the other users of the complex. So the Parks and Recreation Board considered these items at their May 13th meeting, and I'll turn it over to our Parks Director. Steve, if you could introduce who we have here, and then if the Parks Board would sort of talk about that meeting and where we are today.
Sure, thanks, Paul. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. With me tonight is Chairman of our Parks and Recreation Board, Jim Mathis, Dave Davis, and Shelley Cannon, Park Board members, and then also in the audience, Vice Chair Karen McDaniel and Frank Mazetas. As Paul alluded to, the board discussed these issues at their Park Board meeting last week and with the attached recommendations.
Going to have them go through the discussions and where they ended.
Yes.
Okay, want me to start it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for having us here. Our Park Board meetings usually last about 1 hour. Our last meeting, we spent almost an entire hour discussing this before we got into the meat of the rest of the meeting. And I think most of the people felt sympathy a little bit for the wanting to use those fields. Myself, I played Legion baseball as a kid in Wichita, but we have feelings there. But we discussed this and what would be unfair. I'm just going to mention the first one was the priority of reservation. We thought, well, we could give them certain dates, but they also requested they would like to have the fees waived. But then we got to, man, if we give them priority and gave no charge, what are the other teams going to say? And we just felt that that would just be unfair. So then we went into that. We moved to the other one of the 25 coming in at 30 minutes early. And we discussed that. We want to give them something, so we thought we'd split the cost. The Park Board budget has been flat for the last 4 or 5 years, and we don't have any extra money. If we let them, if we have to pay another $25, we would be having to take it from some other source. So we kind of thought we'd split the difference there. We'd let them come in a half hour earlier, so we would be charging them $15 instead of the full amount. Now that's kind of about what we talked about. Anybody else like to add something?
Well, we had like Jim said, we had quite a discussion. We were torn because we also recognized that the Legion fills a void in our baseball program for high school age boys. And unfortunately in Leavenworth, there's no other league that they can play in at that age group other than the Legion ball, and there's not enough of them interested to form 4 or 5 teams that you would need for a league. So we recognize that they have a need, but I think they wanted their cake and eat it too a little bit in that regard. They're not paying the standard fees that all the other teams and all the other leagues are paying here in town. And we felt that it would be good to split that difference, like Jim said, on opening the park a half an hour early. Their therefore half an hour would be on us, the city, and the other half would be on them. But we both know, having played, you need as much time as you can to warm up and all that, but that causes additional wear and tear on the fields and everything. And that's what the money would go to, plus the salary for the fellow that, per gal that opens it up early.
So I didn't play Legion ball for obvious reasons, but my son did. And I know that it's super important to those kids. A lot of the kids that play Legion ball because they can't afford to play on a traveling team. That being said, it's unfair to our kids here if we give them preferential treatment. And I think all of us struggled with the decision because we want them to be successful, we want their program to be successful, but at the same time, what message does that send to our parents who support the Parks and Recs program if we say, well, if you're in high school and you play Legion ball, you get preferential treatment? So pretty much all of us agree on the decisions that we put down. And again, we would like for the Parks and Rec program to be successful enough at some point to offer a high school program. Right now, it's just not there. And but at the same token, with sports comes expense. And it doesn't matter if you're playing T-ball or if you're playing Legion ball, there are some fees that just have to be paid. And that includes field rental if you don't play through a city program. And I feel like at that age, the kids should have some investment. So if their parents can't afford to come up with the fees that are necessary to rent the fields, there's fundraisers, there's super easy fundraisers that you can do. And I volunteered to help them with some ideas if that's what they wanted to do. So again, I think we're all torn, but our allegiance is to the programs that are supported by the Parks and Rec, and I think that's just how it has to be.
I got a question, for item 1. Do you know how many teams actually use the Eagles field? Do they reserve it?
2. They
Two?
only use it for 2 teams, right?
There's 2 Legion teams.
Okay, what about any other teams?
All of our programs, all of our youth baseball, they can rent any of the neighborhood fields through the registration program. And they kind of call us and pick our fields. A lot of times they have a night and a time in mind, and they say what's available.
Yeah.
And so it could be a multitude of teams, Mayor.
Have the Eagles field been rented yet this year?
It has by Legion.
Okay.
Yes, by Bruce Simpson's been in a few times and rented it for practice.
Yeah, they've been out there practicing a lot lately, until last couple days. Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time to study this issue and review it, and I read your recommendations and I support them. I think
I
that's a
might
good
just add
compromise.
One item, we took 3 votes. We voted first on the priority, then we took time on the price there, and then we came back to the opening of the field. We took the 3 votes, and all of them turned out to be unanimous. I think we had 6 members there.
Is that $250 extra for the half hour gonna make you or break you?
$12.50.
Plus $15.
You know, we said, well,
Yeah.
we broke it down.
But that's not half of the 25.
Yeah.
No, you mean could we do $12.50?
Yeah.
I think we could do $12.50. I think we did 15 for rounding,
Yeah.
just to make it easier.
The original thought was $12.50.
I would support that.
We have Commissioner Griswold and also Commissioner Preisinger on the line. Commissioner Griswold, do you have any comments?
On the first issue, as far as scheduling Eagles fields for practice,
Yes, sir.
is the policy first come, first serve in terms of the teams within Leavenworth, in terms of getting one's team on that practice schedule? How does that work?
That is correct. Team coaches will contact our office. The teams in our leagues will contact our office, and they're allowed to schedule up to 3 practices at one time. That way we don't have somebody hogging all the fields. For a team such as the Legion or any other team outside of our leagues, they can call and rent that field. And the minute they rent that field, they can find out what blocks it's open and rent that field for an hour for $25, then that field is theirs for whatever time that's at. But if it's already scheduled by another team, whether it be another paying team or another team within our program, then they have to find an open slot.
What if they, they should know their practice schedule at the beginning of the year? So, I mean, can they only schedule like one practice day or early evening at a time? Or if they know their practice schedule for like a month or month and a half, can they schedule several practices depending on availability?
Our current policy is to allow them to schedule 3 at a time.
Okay.
And the minute they get completed with one of those 3, they can call us right after that. But we don't allow them to have more than 3 on the books to try to keep teams
Okay.
from monopolizing one time slot at one field.
I got it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. My the second question or the point in terms of, and I'm looking at item 2, and I understand the rationale that the Parks and Recreation Board used, but to me, a half an hour is a half an hour, and I think that's a good decision. I support that, but I wouldn't add $2.50 to 50% of the $25 fee. I would keep it at $12.50. They're not, the extra wear on the field. I mean, that's what the money is going towards, the players and the wear and tear and the cost that the city incurs in terms of keeping those fields in good condition. So I just don't agree with, making it $15. I would support keeping it at $12.50 for a half an hour additional. And by the way, I think that this is sort of a standard practice or best practice within the American Legion in terms of the teams that are in American Legion, teams from other cities. I've been told that they come and they need that hour. So I'm supportive of the additional half an hour that's recommended by the Parks and Recreation Board, but I would keep that fee at $12.50.
All right. Do we have a Commissioner Preisinger?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to thank the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board for all the work they put in on this. I know they studied it at length. Members of this board, they know the sports field and the parks in the town better than anyone else. I think they put good thought into this, and I cannot disagree with anything that they came up with. I would recommend that we go with all of their recommendations. I think they're the experts. They heard from all sides, and they know the users, they know the community, and I believe they made a great recommendation, and I support it wholeheartedly, as stated.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Preisinger. So do we have a consensus to keep it at $12.50 and allow the American Legion team to go in a half hour early?
Yes.
All right, all right, so to move that forward, and for item number 1, I'm in favor about reducing the cost for priority of the field instead of waiving all fees. That's what I'm proposing.
I'm not.
Say that again.
Reducing the cost instead of waiving all the fees, instead of no cost. I'll be in
I
favor.
couldn't support that, no.
Okay. Did you hear what I proposed, Commissioner Griswold?
No,
About
this is Commissioner.
Huh?
This is Commissioner Preisinger. Item number 1.
Yes, sir.
Priority reservation and no cost use of the field for practice. The board's recommendation, Parks and Rec's board, they voted no on both those items. Is that what you're recommending on item 1?
Yeah, but
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm asking about reducing the cost from the standard fee that they normally charge to reserve a park.
Is that on item 1 or item 2?
Item one.
So he's proposing an alternative
Charge
of
for,
not waiving, not full. Commissioner Bowder and Dedeke did not go along with that. I believe they're
said no.
sticking with the standard fees.
Sticking with the recommendation.
So we have two with recommendation and 1 looking at a reduced fee.
Okay, I don't know if I'm completely clear. I'm in favor of the recommendation the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board put forth for item number 1 and item number 2.
All right.
Does
all
that
right.
make,
Yeah, I got you.
am I
Appreciate it.
answering your question?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Hey, thank
Okay.
you all. We appreciate you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for the hard work you guys did on this, and you guys,
Yes, sir.
thanks so much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, this is Mr. Griswold.
Yes, sir.
Yes, just to clarify me, I am in favor of what the Parks and Recreation Board recommended for item number 1 in both instances. At this point, I don't think this is a meeting that we should be discussing a reduced fee. That I wouldn't be opposed to looking at that at a future study session. That wouldn't last all that long, but I think
No,
it
no
does.
more study sessions, Mike.
I lost.
They studied it already.
I
The
lost.
board
Mike.
studied it.
It's all right.
Okay, well, that's fine. On item number 2, I just wanted to let you know that I supported a $12.50.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I got you.
Okay.
Okay,
All right. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
I think we're good on that.
Next item on the agenda, development proposal presentation.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, we have Justin Kaufman, Cord Maxwell from Development Team here to present a project on what would be the east side of 7th Street, south of Metropolitan. And they're here to present it to the Commission. The only action we're looking for tonight, if you're favorable, is to give a consensus to have staff continue to work on a draft development agreement to then bring back to the Commission in the future. But I'll turn it over to these gentlemen, and they're going to show you what they're looking at.
Thank you, Paul. Cord Maxwell with the Polsinelli Law Firm. Very happy to be back in front of you all. Some faces are very familiar that we've worked on a number of projects over the years, and I'm very proud to be here representing Justin Kaufman and Cadence Commercial Real Estate and Fishman Commercial Real Estate. We have what we believe is a exciting development proposal to put in front of the commissioners and hopefully have your buy-in and understanding for it. Justin will give a little bit about sort of his company's history and how he got involved with these sites and where it came from, and then I'll dive into a little bit more of the details of the actual proposal, the incentive request that we would make for the public-private partnership with you all, and then allow, of course, the commissioners to ask any questions of the proposal. But I might turn it over to Justin to tell you a little bit about Cadence and Fishman.
Thanks. My name is Justin Kaufman. I'm with Cadence Commercial Real Estate. Cadence is actually a joint venture entity that is a joint venture between Fishman Commercial Real Estate and a few other individuals, including myself. That sort of makes up the Cadence company. We sort of have our own brand because we focus specifically on retail property. Fishman Commercial is a little bit more generalist in their approach to the real estate stuff. We focus on, at Cadence specifically, on the Cadence side, we focus on the retail portion of real estate specifically. I actually just got back today from the ICSC Commercial Shopping Center Convention in Las Vegas. It's where all the national retailers go from all over the country, if not the world, to meet and talk about locations. And we have this site on display with some retailers on some handouts that we were giving out as we walked the floor and things of that nature. So, but we've had our eye on this property for quite some time. You guys are probably more familiar at this point with Fishman Commercial. They've owned some property in the market over the years and have listed some property over the years, one of them being on the other corner of the intersection we're looking at here. It's by way of Cadence, it's a related entity, but it's a totally separate entity also that is not included in this particular project. But it is what sort of prompted our initial interest in the area. And we've since been working on trying to put together a redevelopment plan. And we try to take a diligent approach to what we do at Cadence to develop property. It starts from my perspective with understanding the consumer, understanding the people that live in the area. I should clarify, we don't just specialize in retail. We really focus on daily needs-oriented retail and neighborhood services. If you get on our website, cadencekc.com, you'll see a bunch of grocery store development work we've done around the market, Price Chopper being one of our largest clients. We've also developed for small, more locally run concepts like Spin Pizza and Johnny's Tavern and concepts like that. We just finished a project in Raymore, Missouri, which is sort of a similar sized project. It was on about 3 acres, and we put, Panda Express and K Jewelers and Mod Pizza, and it's from our standpoint, it's really all about creating an experience and meeting the demands of the neighborhood. To that point, we went and met with the Army base a couple weeks ago and got a tour of their facilities and really tried to dive into what their needs are and got some really helpful information. So our goal is to maximize the highest and best use for each site we look at, and that's what we're in the process of doing here. We're not at a point where we have, committed tenants to the project, but we are at a point where we have some interested parties. And so here we are to try to make sure we're on the same page with the city before we really take it too much further down the road.
Yeah, and so I'll then jump in and give a little bit more. So the site that we're talking about is the 3.5 acres at 6th and Metropolitan. And that's principally made up of the Armed Forces Bank site and then the Commander's Inn. And I will be very frank with the commission that when we started this, we were really looking at the Fort Gate Shops that was with the related entity, the Fishman Commercial, and the Armed Forces Bank. And neither of those were easy deals, but they were ones that you could very much pencil and maybe come in and do it with a limited CID or something like that. I think we quickly learned in talks with staff and taking the temperature of the community and otherwise that there was other properties in this area that may have been of significant interest to see redeveloped. And so from that, Justin went and was able to put the Commander's Inn site under contract as well. So that is now part of the proposal to have both the Armed Forces Bank and the Commander's Inn site redeveloped as part of this. But it gets to some of the challenges is that with both of these sites, you are going and acquiring existing assets. They may not be the highest and best use for those sites, but they are existing assets. And so we're having to pay sort of a premium to acquire an existing business out there and then go and demolish that to get that down to actual pure ground prices. And so that's part of what's leading us to a public-private partnership. I think the other part that's leading us to this public-private partnership is, unfortunately, we can't come to you and say, we've got these 3 tenants right now that are ready to go. That's our business. We know that business, and we're willing to take risk in this business, to risk our private equity and debt and capital in these kind of scenarios, to go and do that. But it is a little bit scary, and it's definitely a little bit scarier when we've added in a relatively large acquisition on the Commander's Inn site, that we're gonna have to acquire that, and we don't have a committed user at this time. But even though we don't have committed users, we do have a substantial idea of the types of things that could go on the site. We think that there will be an ATM on the site. That's part of that the bank is willing to sell, but they want to still have a ATM presence on there. We think that this could have a convenience store on the site. We think a higher end convenience store would be part of the use here. About a 5,000 square foot restaurant, another 1,800 square foot restaurant. And then we just sort of plugged in on the back on the Commander's Inn site about another, couple thousand square feet of retailer office that would go there. And that really truly is drawing boxes on a paper right now at this point. That could change and morph over time. We just know that it's important to clean up this whole area. That was why you created a TIF district so many years ago. And if we can be an instrument and a tool of getting that done, we're happy to take that step with you all. Oh, sorry. Okay, so costs, getting down to what do we think this sort of plan here would cost? This isn't the biggest project we've ever been involved in. It's not the biggest project you've ever all been involved in, but we do think it serves an important city function of trying to make what you all wanted to happen with that TIF district. And the numbers for the acquisition are north of $2.5 million, which is a very stout price for on a per square foot basis, right? For what we're buying it for is purely land. That $2.5 million is accounts for the fact that we are buying these operating businesses and then demolishing them. The hard costs, the vertical construction costs, for all of those components we laid in afterwards would be about a little north of 3.3. And soft costs to get all of this done and work through it, architecture, engineering, permitting, financing fees, about $1.2 million. So rough math of where we sit today, we're at about a $7.1 million project on that. So our request for how do we make a $7.1 million project work when the market rates for retail and things that we would get in this probably doesn't justify that. And so we've been trading financial analysis back and forth with your city staff, and we came to a proposal that our request would be to use the TIF to create a new TIF plan on this site. And from that, we would take the incremental property taxes that are generated for a period of 20 years. We would also request 50%, half of the city's sales tax in this process. And then we would also request that there's some excess TIF dollars being generated in the TIF district right now, that we could grab those extra TIF dollars to be able to use them for the acquisition and infrastructure of the site. And then in addition, we would tax ourselves of our development an extra CID of approximately 1.25. That adds up to just north of about $3 million in true net present value cost of those incentives. So what I did quickly to sort of give a graphic representation of this, and we are of course happy for any members of the commission and for your staff if we're able to move forward to really drill down in these numbers for you all. But what Justin and I wanted to do was give a very quick snapshot of what does the world look like if we do nothing versus our proposal here, right? And when I say what does the world look like, what does it look like for you all as sort of the guardians of the public treasury, right? Of being the representatives of all of the taxing jurisdictions when we go through a TIF process. And what we did this quick analysis was that we believe that you roughly would see in taxes if we did nothing, if we just kept the commanders in there and we kept the armed forces bank, and there wasn't reinvestment in the area, so it maybe just kept declining, that we would roughly see $1.7 million of taxes that would go to the jurisdictions. We then looked at...
Excuse me, is this over that 20-year?
Over that 20-year period, yes, not over on a per year period, it's obviously much, much smaller than that. But about $1.7, $1.8 million. We then went through and did an analysis of, with our development, what would that end up accruing to the jurisdictions with the development? And we think that it's almost $9 million. That's inclusive of still some part of that coming to the development team through this. So we think, and this pie chart was just trying to give a little bit of a sense of the taxes that were uncaptured, the state sales taxes, the county sales taxes, the city sales taxes, all of the other sort of pieces of the revenue pie when new development comes. So I think it argues that even though we are making a request for a public-private partnership from you all, that in the long run, this is still a good financial decision for both the city and all of the taxing jurisdictions as well. Quickly, we just looked at your economic development policy, and I know that this area of town has always been an area of great focus. I think it hits many of the points of your policy of why the TIF district was created, why you wanted to spur redevelopment there. I think that it would hit all of those components and would be a worthwhile project. With that, Mr. Mayor, members of the commission, any of on the phone, Justin and I would be happy to speak to any of the numbers or the issues or the development or the timeline of how we'd like to move this process forward.
Well, I definitely appreciate the presentation, and I'm excited about, moving forward with this project and cleaning up that area. Just say if we did move forward with it, time-wise, when do you think you'll start on the project?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We are coming forward and we have closing dates literally coming in the month of June. That is moving forward on this. And so this meeting tonight is really important, and we thank you for letting us get on your schedule because we're going to be taking a leap of faith. Nothing is binding, right? We have to go through all the correct process. We have to go through a development agreement. But Justin and I really wanted to be able to sit in front of the commission, be able to, you see us see you, and get a feel that this is something that you don't have large objection to. You can see it working. We've got details to work out, and obviously you all have to do your due diligence as you always appropriately do, but that you can generally support a package like this so we can go forward and close. So, Mr. Mayor, if we closed that early, we would be working through with you and your staff through the summer on getting all of that documented, and then I think we would move forward with demolition and those components as soon as we had some tenants ready to go as well through all of that process. So I think this could be a very quick process compared to many times we're talking about this and then it's a 1 year or a 2 year wait. I think for some of the immediate benefits you all would look for of cleaning up the area just by getting things in a land state, I think that could move forward relatively quickly.
Yes, sir, Commissioner Bowder?
No, I'm just listening to it. That was a good question because I'd like to see it cleaned up. That's the first start.
Been after that for many years.
Commissioner
I
Bowder?
support it in general.
In general, it's absolutely.
Commissioner Griswold?
Yes, I have one question. I know the development team will work with the city staff on a development agreement that will be brought back to the commission at some future date. But do you foresee a request for any upfront incentives from the city? Or is your intention that revenue created from your investment fund the incentive on a pay-as-you-go basis?
Great question, Commissioner Griswold. We are looking for all of these incentives to be on a pay-as-you-go basis, that we are harvesting the revenues we create out of our development alone. The only part that is not that is collecting the other sort of monies in the TIF district already. I think those are committed on other commitments for a period of time, maybe 3 or 4 years before those will pay out. So we wouldn't be receiving those immediately, and frankly, we wouldn't expect to receive those until we perform in some form or fashion, and we agree. But we would ultimately look for those revenues too to be able to offset some of these costs. But none of that would be that we want the city to bank us in any way, that you have to come out of pocket to before we sort of produce in this process. We fully understand, and Justin's done a ton of deals, his company's done a ton of deals, we've been involved with most of them, and we know that we have to produce for you and the citizens of Leavenworth to be able to receive these revenues to make it work.
All right, thank you. Good?
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Preisinger?
I want to thank Cadence Fishman for putting this proposal together. I know we're at the beginning stages. It's moving right along. I look forward to hearing more about it as this thing develops. I think it's exciting for that part of town. We'll have a new look and new tax base and new opportunities and more retail, whatever may go in there for the citizens of Leavenworth. I think it's a great program and look forward to it.
All right, Sounds like we have a consensus to move this project
That's pretty good
forward.
consensus right
Yeah.
there.
Yes.
5-0 is, I can count.
Yes, sir.
Normally, the whole part is you just stop talking once you get what you want in this thing, too, so.
Hey, so man, we definitely appreciate it. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, sir.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. We'll look forward to spending the summer with you all.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, review 1421 Independence Court Bank erosion report.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, shortly after the city's stormwater fee was enacted, or started collecting in 2019, the city started receiving a lot of calls. We started receiving calls from residents throughout the community who had a variety of different issues, stormwater, sinkholes, creeks that were creeping up from their creek bed towards their house. One of the ones that we identified early on that we knew about, but that we identified as getting to the top of the list was a concern in the 1421 to 1425 area of Independence Court. It is not uncommon, and I would dare say it is pretty common within the city of Leavenworth to have waterways, creeks, streams that change over the years and begin encroaching in people's backyards. The question then becomes, city, can you help me? The standard answer is that is not actually a city responsibility. We try to do what we can, but for the most part, that's a private property issue. The difference in this project is, one, the rapid deterioration, but more importantly, between the stream bed edge and the houses is a city sanitary sewer line. So that's critical infrastructure that serves the community. So one of the very first studies that this new stormwater fee was able to fund to come in and do a thorough analysis of what we can do, how we can help the homeowners, how we can protect city infrastructure, is we hired Water Resource Solutions and Mr. Don Baker to go out there and look at this project and tell us what our options are, how can we solve this problem. So Don is here tonight to go through that a little bit, and our Public Works Director, Mike McDonald, is here as well. So I'll turn it over to them and they can guide you through this project.
Thank you, Paul. I'll kind of summarize some of what we see in the policy report. Don's here. He wrote the main report. I've tried to summarize it as best I can. But this is really a fairly typical question, as Paul had indicated. The creeks eroding my backyard. What's the city going to do to help me with that? In this case, we recognize, if you look on the aerial photo, the green line is the sanitary sewer line. The sanitary sewer line runs right behind these houses, and the creek in this area, we believe, has moved in the last 20 years, basically 20 to 30 feet toward the houses. Don's research shows that perhaps since 1940s, it's moved as much as 70 or 80 feet, possibly more, at this particular location. So it is moving along. The sewer line is probably what gets the city involved in this one much more so than we would on any other ones, particularly almost everything out here. If there was no sewer line out here, this is all private property, and in fact, almost all of the creek is on private property that is not the houses. It's on the next property to the south and to the west. I've put together a little picture here that say this is not a new problem. This is two aerial photos, one from '98 and one from 2018, showing 5 Mile Creek west of Shrine Park Road. And if you didn't know, you would, and you can't tell really by looking at the creek alignment, we've had 4 substantial sewer repairs out there dating back to the early 90s. If I hadn't been here when that happened, you couldn't find it unless you were walking through there looking for it. Major washout of the sewer line in the 1990s. We had a creek crossing identified on here that washed out in 2012. And in 2016, we had the piece of sewer line, essentially the same sewer line as we're looking at here in Independence Court, washed out. And I got a picture of it here. That's the pipe laying in the bottom of the creek. It was the most miserable mess. If you were an aquatic organism, you were between here and the river, you were pretty well dead at the conclusion of the repair of the sewer break because of the sewer contaminated the water sucks all the oxygen out, and all the little critters die. So it's not to be taken lightly, the fact that there's a sewer line that has a creek moving toward it. Water Resources prepared a report that looked at some of the history and some of the types of things that happen, and Don can talk here in a minute that this is not a Leavenworth problem, it's much larger than that. But ultimately, you end up in a position where there's kind of three things that you can do in the short term. One is look at the project as a large project to create a stable stream, perhaps from 14th and New Lawrence Road all the way up to, say, 19th Terrace and Thornton. That's a very large project that solves a lot of problems. It also costs perhaps $2 million or more. So we looked at some closer options. The area that's boxed out in the red here comes from Don's report. It has more of a local stabilization with the green dots representing essentially grade, we call them grade control structures. They're substantial rock dams across the creek to keep it from eroding and help it fix its elevation, helps let the plant growth get reestablished, it becomes less active. And then this little horseshoe right here is one that's close to the houses. You would have a traditional rock embankment that we've seen on the other projects further on 5 Mile Creek. Those two options, that option is the less expensive. The other two is in that $600,000 range. And if you want to look for kind of a natural type solution, it didn't show up real well in the policy report copies, but you can see it on the screen here. If you take the stream and you lengthen it out, make a series of bends, you can do away with a lot of the riprap, and the grade control structures become a lot less complex because you've lengthened the stream out. It tends to slow down. But that gets to be very, very expensive, well over $1 million, almost $1.5 million.
So that would be a lot more expensive than the other option.
That's very much more expensive, but it's if you like kind of a Mother Nature solution, this
Would
is.
that be a longer fix, or would it make any, either one?
Talk to Don, and I think he'll tell you there.
The answer is yes, it's probably a longer-term fix. Think of it as this is a solution where we're minimizing the energy and we're slowing things down. And so over the long term, it should last a lot longer. The other one, we're kind of holding our ground, so to speak, and kind of putting up armament against the forces that are acting. So in the end, this should last quite a bit longer. And the ones that we have done in this manner, we've seen significant length of time.
And you've had some of these in place for several years.
We've had some of these in place for a decade or so.
What's the difference in the cost approximately?
Kind of the brute force civil engineering approach was in the $600,000 range. This was estimated at $1.4 million. That's substantial.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of it. And it all has to do with all the earth moving that is involved. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The question, and we ask on this all the time, can't we do something simple? Can't we do something smaller? Can't we do something that is not so expensive? And the answer is you probably can. Don't count on it lasting as long as you'd like it to last. Don't expect it to do what you think it will do. People have a tendency to put too small rocks. They have a tendency to put too small timbers. They underestimate the force of the water and the energy that's involved in it. We have proposed, if we move forward with this project, that we take a good hard look at this and make sure that the project alternative that we're recommending, which is the civil engineering riprap approach, this project here, this here, maybe there's a way to make it less expensive, but Don assures me he's been doing this for some time and there probably isn't, but I want to look at it.
We'll look at it again, absolutely, we'll be happy to look at it again, and these numbers are very much a study and a budgeting type of a number, so we would definitely fine tune that as we went into design. This particular approach that we too recommend this approach. This is one where we try to minimize the amount of rock. That's the expensive component in the construction. We try to minimize that, but at the same time, we want to make sure it works. And then try to do a lot of grading, a lot of earthwork to minimize cost and to make it the banks less steep. Last thing we want to do is leave something that's similar to what's there. If you go out and look in the backyard, I believe it's a 14, is it 25, that's the one to the farther upstream? Yes. You go out in their backyard, it's a little concerning how close the swing set is to the sheer drop-off.
And it's 10 or 12 feet down.
It's about 10, it's at least a 12-foot tall bank, so.
And that's moving toward the sewer line a little bit more every year, it seems. And their house, it's
Eventually, it could start impacting house foundations and things. Just so you're aware of this, Mike alluded to it earlier, is that this is not just a Leavenworth problem. This happens everywhere. We do these projects all over, all over the country, and a ton of them here in the Midwest. But what happens is when we change the watershed, and so we change it in some manner, in some way we add more runoff. And typically that's building houses and parking lots and roads and things like that. But we even see it way back when they broke the prairie and started farming. We saw similar changes. If you go back and you go back to the old surveys that were done, you can actually see that the streams started changing. And so that's what's happening. The watershed develops, you add more water, it gets more energy, and then the stream tries to lengthen itself out, flatten its slope so it can slow down, and then when it does that, it moves around. Typically what happens, the streams degrade downward until they hit something like limestone and can't, then they'll go out. This one's going downward. And as it does, the banks get taller, and as the banks get taller, they become unstable and they fall in. So,
Well,
that's what's happening.
Can I ask Don a couple questions?
yes, sir.
Don, something like this, we're looking to keep the bank where it is. We're not trying to reclaim much bank, or what are we talking about as far as, I know the primary concern of the residents out there, a lot of them is they're losing property.
Correct. This particular approach is that we're not trying to reclaim a lot of property back. As we move into design, we can certainly look at that. Then we're adding earthwork costs, and things like that. This particular one was basically trying to keep it essentially where it was, try to reclaim a little bit, but just keep it where it is, and then be able to get a nice stable slope up into the backyards.
Roughly, a project like this, can you talk about the impact? How do you get back there? How do you, how much property, how much impact will it have on property owners?
These are always fun projects, and unfortunately, I wish I could say that I worked on projects where this wasn't the case, but all the ones I work on involve houses nearby. The answer is it's a big mess. To get back into these backyards, we're going to have to go in between houses somewhere where we have room. Typically, that's where you have existing utility or drainage easements. It looks like off to the southwest, if you will, that neighborhood through there's an open lot up there, it looks like, towards where it says grade control there. Go up, or right in there. That might be a good access point. We look for those opportunities and either with existing easements or we try to get additional easement to make that access.
It's possible you may have to come clear in from 14th Street. And this is all on property that is not owned by any of the homeowners.
Correct. And we've actually had to walk quite a ways have the contractor walk quite a ways upstream. Now, with that said, what I've also had is the most complicated project I ever had. I wasn't sure how they were going to get in, and the contractor ended up buying the house, going through the yards, and then restoring it and selling it for a profit. But that's not the norm. He's very, very entrepreneurial.
Don, if you don't have a solid month of rain like we've had, what is a rough timeline for a project like this, start to finish?
A project like this, if we could get in and get out, on the order of, I don't want to underspeak or overspeak, I would say on the order of probably 60 to 90 days of solid work if they could get in and get it done.
Construction time.
That's construction time. If that's what
You
they
got your
refer
prep
to.
time
yeah.
before that.
Construction time. Now you add in the rain and everything like that, we're probably talking on the order of a 4-month type project. Unfortunately, I wish I could say that because you're working in the creek, it's gonna stop raining, but I guarantee you, as soon as you start your creek project, it's gonna start raining again.
So from the staff's perspective, the point tonight is to see what your thoughts are, the direction that we're sort of recommending, get your thoughts on that. As far as us scheduling that, it was kind of dependent upon where the commission fits with what option you want. Then we'll go back and look at, with the stormwater fee that we have in place. As you know, we had Orange Fence number 1 just go out, Orange Fence 2 is right behind it. We got a second and Chestnut presentation on June 4th that the commission's gonna see. It's a huge project. So we have projects lined up. But knowing the direction that you're comfortable going, we can look and see how that can be scheduled.
Well, personally, I hate to go with option 2 because it's not gonna be a permanent fix, but I wanna go with option 2 and pray that it comes in cheaper.
Don, what would you expect the life, I mean, obviously, it's not gonna just fail one day, but talk about the durability of option 2, or the option that we're looking at, option 1. The hard civil engineering.
Yeah.
Option 1.
The durability, that's gonna be great. What it turns out, the difference between the two has to do with the robustness of the materials we use. So really, option 1 is gonna have the same longevity as the other option, within reason. It's going to require larger materials. It's gonna require larger rock, more robust foundations and things to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere.
But it's not a Band-Aid.
It's not a Band-Aid, no, this is a permanent fix. What it will do is, the more civil engineering you get, the more your maintenance is gonna increase. So the difference between option 1 and option 2 is that I would expect option 2 to just become kind of the natural stream, and 50, 60, 70 years from now, you won't know it's there. 50, 60, 70 years from now with option 1, you may have to go in and do some repairs 20 years from now. Some minor
Well,
repairs.
yeah, when you talk about 20 years, that's
Yeah,
better than talking about 5 years.
exactly. And they would be minor repairs, because
wanna
what we're
complete
doing is we
something and
haven't
dump it
done
on the next
anything to
commission.
dissipate any of the forces or the energy that's
Right.
working on there, so we're just trying to hold it back.
Okay.
And I think the similar repairs that we've done on the other portion of 5 Mile Creek, they have been very stable. The one that we did in the 1990s, I tried to find anybody that even remembered that. No one remembered it, no one knew where it was, no one could find it, and so when we were doing one of the other repairs, I walked out there, and I found it and it started to kind of come back to me. But it has been extremely durable. It was done right, and then the repair we did on the failed sewer line in 2016 has been very stable, durable repair. And Don put together the plans and permitting on that as well.
So if we did do option 2, we won't be able to do any other projects until the year after.
We'd have to bond option 2. It'd be too
Okay,
expensive.
yeah.
We couldn't pay for that for years. You'd have to look at something like that. It would take a large portion for a couple of years.
How big of a priority is this over our other projects that we've already started?
Well, that if the consensus of the commission was option 1, we could look at it. The sanitary sewer line brings it up toward the top.
Okay.
If that fails, we got a lot of bigger problems, and we're
Okay,
looking at
got
pipe
it. So
replacement
this is a high
and
priority.
repairs. So it's near the top. There's some other ones that are similar that have very detrimental effect on property owners, but not cases where we'd have to look at sanitary sewer line repair
Right.
if they went too much farther.
Okay.
I like option 1.
I'd be fine with option 1. It sounds like it would be a good, stable option, especially after what you saw, in some of these earlier repairs.
What we'd like to do is move.
There's
Commissioner Griswold?
Yeah, I'm a little confused. The read-ahead had the staff recommending stabilize reach 6, option 2, approximately $1.4 million. Focused repairs in vicinity of Independence Court by returning creek to a more natural alignment environment with grade control and a bigger riprap, although that sentence didn't include that word. So is that still the recommendation of the staff, or has that changed?
Mike, on the recommendation under the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, mine says recommendation 2, reach 6, option 1. Is that not what
Which is
yours
on the
says?
Screen, that's one's on the screen.
No.
For 600.
No.
Okay.
6-1.
Yeah, the numbering is unfortunately confusing. If you look on the first page of the policy report, number 1 is tributary improvements for $2 million.
Right.
Number 2 is stabilize reach 6 using option 1, which is the civil engineering approach. And the number 3 is stabilize reach 6 using option 2, which is the curved natural type stream environment. So if we say option 1, that can, I believe, be misconstrued as tying into one of the other number ones. Maybe we should have called A, B, and C or something like that.
Or reach 6, option 1, like you have
So
it titled
our,
there.
our recommendation is reach 6, option 1, which
Okay.
was the $600,000-ish choice.
Yeah, sorry for the confusion on that, Mike. Commissioner Griswold.
Okay, so the staff recommendation is stabilize reach 6, option 1, approximately 600,000. Am I hearing that correct?
Yes, sir.
And just tell me, so we don't think that there's much to gain in terms of advantages or time in terms of the longevity of the repair between, we think we're going to get about the same longevity between option 1 and option 2. And maybe the question was asked and I missed it, but,
Yes, sir. We would expect the same longevity as I was explaining. What it turns out, where the difference comes into play has to do with the robustness of the materials in the engineering and potentially somewhat more frequent maintenance over time, meaning rather than it going 50, 60, 70, 100 years without doing anything, you might go 20, 30 years without having to do a few minor things.
so that is the main difference between the option 1 and the option 2.
That's the main difference, is really the robustness of the system, yes.
The only other question is there any difference in terms of the protection that we'll need to make sure exists with respect to the sewer line? That protection can be accomplished under both options?
That's correct.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and finally, my thing is, I understand, well, for the option 1 of 600,000, we would not have to bond that, Mr. Kramer, that wouldn't have to be bonded?
No, you probably wouldn't want to bond that. The amount wouldn't be long enough. You'd probably want to cash finance that. Based on the status of temp notes being up to 5 years, I don't think it makes sense to bond a project of that amount.
And then, I know probably most of the money would come, or tell me if I'm wrong, most of the money would come from the stormwater utility budget, but would there be some money from the budget of the water pollution control budget? That was mentioned in the read ahead.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, we're gonna look at that and see what we can reasonably charge off. I would assume the vast majority of the funds would be required from the stormwater management fee.
Then I support option 1. Stabilize reach 6, option 1, approximately $600,000. That's what I support.
All right. Commissioner Preisinger?
Yeah, I had some of the same concerns or questions that Commissioner Griswold had. Clarification, but that was clarified on which one we're going with. So it's stabilized reach 6, approximately 850 feet, option 1, $600,000. I think this does affirm our decision to have a stormwater fee. This is just one case in the city, of which there are probably another 10 or 15 in residential neighborhoods like this. I'm just grabbing a number, but it just shows how big these problems are, and we have to address them. And without the stormwater fee, we would be at a complete loss. So I do support option 1, stabilized reach number 6, which is recommendation number 2, I guess.
So we have a consensus to move forward with option 1 of this project?
Yes.
Yep.
Option
Yes.
one.
Option
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
two, stabilize, reach
Reach
six.
6, option 1.
Yeah.
We'll work with Water Resource Solutions to develop a scope of work and a proposed fee and city manager and move it forward.
Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Don.
Next item on the agenda, discuss date of elected officials taking office.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, Senate Bill 105 has passed the Kansas House and has been signed by the governor. However, it doesn't take effect till July 1. But what Senate Bill 105 does is when the legislature moved local elections to the fall, and so, whatever the first Tuesday in November was, the state selected a date in January by when the local elected officials would take office. They picked a Monday, the city commission meets on a Tuesday, and there's that 2-month gap. What was happening in some cities was in that 2.5 month gap, they were having trouble meeting quorums. People weren't showing up for meetings. So as a compromise, the state legislature said, okay, local governments, anytime between, after December 1, you can elect to choose the date that you set when you swear in your new representative. So you can do it on the night of your regular meeting, a special meeting, anywhere you want, as long as it has to be from December 1 on. Although it's brand new, a couple of Johnson County cities have already taken some action, and a couple other cities around the state, and we expect other ones to take it. They have moved theirs into December. And so it's before the commission for discussion about what you would want to do. Again, you can't do it before December 1, so you'd still have a month after the election essentially. But anytime the commission, if you want to leave it as it is, look at changing it. We just thought we'd bring it before you since it just passed.
Yeah, it makes sense to change it. Commissioner Preisinger, I know this is yours. You can lead this one.
Yes, I did bring this up a couple of weeks ago, and I believe that we should have the change, the first meeting, the first Tuesday in December, and that's usually a study session, but as with many study sessions, we can have a special meeting and we can seat the new commission at that time. Once again, the wisdom of changing the elections from April to November, I think there's a lot of fallacies in that. We've got now 7 to 10 month campaign season. As soon as the commissioners are elected, I think the faster they can be seated, it's better for the commission, and it's better for the city. So I'm in favor of doing the first Tuesday in December at a study session, and then have a special meeting to to elect the new mayor pro tem, financial controller, or financial claims representative, as well as seating the new commission.
All right, Commissioner Bowder?
I agree. I think the first meeting, I was thinking the first regular meeting, but why not have it the first meeting, period? We have in December, no matter what the meeting is, in case you didn't have a study session or whatever. I think it should just be the first meeting in
So that
December.
first
He
December?
said November, didn't he?
December.
Yeah, we can't do it.
December. You can't do it in November. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Commissioner Dedeke?
I'll concur.
All right, I agree. Commissioner Griswold?
I support the proposal outlined by Mr. Preisinger.
Okay, so the first Tuesday, the first meeting in
The first
December.
meeting in
All right, so we have a consensus then. Yes, sir.
We'd probably want to do the first Tuesday.
Yeah,
Okay.
first Tuesday.
Because it's going to have to be set by
First
ordinance.
Tuesday is what I support.
First Tuesday.
Yeah.
That sounds good to
And
me.
just so you know, you'll see both a resolution and an ordinance. For some reason, the state decided to say that you have to enact it by resolution, but we're a city, so we have to put it on our ordinance. So you'll see
Okay.
probably both a resolution and an ordinance.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so first Tuesday in December. We have new commissioners. So we still got time for people to submit their names. June 3rd is the deadline.
Yeah, and if I don't get elected, then I can just leave. Right after the election. I won't have to sit there. Larry and I won't have to sit there until January.
Commissioner Bowder, do you have anything?
No, I don't have anything else, thank you.
Commissioner Dedeke?
No, I don't.
Commissioner Griswold?
I wanted to ask Mr. Kramer whether the city had gotten any more information on the wreath laying ceremony for the Memorial Day ceremony at National Cemetery.
Yes, I've been corresponding with Mr., I know his first name's Conrad, I wish I had his last name, and he's leaving it up to the city to determine, and I was going to speak to the mayor after the meeting. The city has been added to the official program at the wreath laying ceremony for Memorial Day, and the question was, would they, if all 5 commissioners wanted to come out and represent the city in ceremonial lake, could we do that, or are they going to limit it just to the mayor? And they said it was up to the city. So if 2 or 3 commissioners wanted to represent the city at that, they could. It's really up to the city who they would want to lay the wreath for the city. Only having 5, I don't think that's too many, but whoever wanted to.
Is it the VA or the fort?
So it's the VA. But they've also asked if we would like to participate in both the fort. There are different times. Originally, the question was the VA, so I was going to speak to the mayor, but the VA ceremony is first.
Okay.
My parents are buried at the fort, so I prefer the fort, but I didn't know if we do both, if you did both or one.
And maybe the commission, if they would so choose, could separate, have, 1 or 2 do the, but this is relatively new information. First year we're doing it, so I would look to the commission for how they would like to separate those responsibilities.
Okay. Commissioner Preisinger?
I have nothing.
Mr. Paul?
I don't have anything.
Man, I just want to say congratulations to the graduates of 2019. I wish you much well, successful life. God bless.
Amen.
Meeting adjourned.